Hey there. Ever come across a word or phrase that just makes you want to dig deeper? Like, where did that come from? Well, today we're doing exactly that. We're going to unearth some of those hidden gems in the English language. And you know what? We're using those awesome examples you sent in from episode 7, Mastering English Vocabulary, Phrasal Verbs, Idioms, and Slang.pdf as our guide.
It's incredible, isn't it? How these expressions, whether the everyday idioms or even slang, can add so much richness and depth to how we speak. It's like they give us a peek into the past, a little glimpse into the history and culture that shaped how we talk today.
Right. It's like finding a secret passage in an old library. You never know what kind of treasures you'll unearth. So, ready to put on our explorer hats and get our hands a little dirty with some, what can we call it, linguistic archaeology?
Absolutely. Let's dive right in.
Perfect. Now, the first phrase we've got on our list is one you've probably heard and used a million times. Brush up on. You know that feeling, right? When you realize you need to refresh a skill, maybe you've got a job interview coming up, and that elevator pitch needs a little work.
And you know what's fascinating? The origins of brush up on might actually be linked to the simple act of, well, brushing dust off something. It popped up in the mid-19th century, and it likely came from the idea of literally brushing off an object to bring back that shine.
So when we brush up on skills, we're kind of like polishing them up, making them sharp and ready to impress. I love that.
Precisely. And it's not just for practical skills either. You can brush up on anything, really. A foreign language, historical trivia, even your knowledge of the latest memes. It's all about giving that memory a little refresh and sharpening up your understanding.
Like oiling those mental gears, right? Make sure everything runs smoothly. And speaking of origins, our next expression is a bit of a head scratcher. Kick the bucket.
Uh,
Okay, we all know it's a euphemism for, well, but have you ever stopped to think about where on earth that came from?
It is a rather, shall we say, delicate concept, veiled in almost everyday language. And there are actually two main theories about its origin, both of them surprisingly visual. One is tied to executions, rather grim, actually.
Oh, now I'm really curious.
The imagery is a bit bleak, to be honest. Imagine someone standing on a bucket about to be hanged. To carry out the sentence, someone would have to kick that bucket away.
Whoa, I never knew that. That adds a whole new dimension to the phrase, doesn't it? What's the other theory?
The second one, well, it revolves around an Old English word, buka, which meant beam. This theory suggests that kick the bucket might actually be related to the beam that was used to hang slaughtered animals. It's a very vivid image, if a bit, well, unsettling, of what life and death were like back then.
It's amazing, isn't it, how these expressions can almost transport us back in time, give us a little glimpse into how people lived and even what they worried about. And speaking of glimpses, let's move on to a word that always makes me think of beauty that doesn't last forever. Ephemeral. Gotta be honest, this was one I knew well before we started digging into things for today.
Ephemeral. It is a beautiful word, isn't it? It captures those moments, those experiences that are so precious precisely because they're fleeting. Imagine cherry blossoms, for example, in full bloom. Here 1 minute, gone the next with a gust of wind. That's ephemeral.
Oh, I see exactly what you mean. It's like that feeling you get when you watch a breathtaking sunset. You know it's incredible, but it's not going to last. It's a masterpiece, but it's temporary.
You've got it. And the word itself has ancient roots. It comes from the Greek ephemeros, which literally means lasting only a day. It's fascinating, though, because the first recorded use in English, back in the 16th century, was actually to describe fevers that ran their course quickly.
So it went from something as fleeting as a fever to describing any kind of temporary beauty, idea, or experience that's wild. Language is full of these weird and wonderful journeys, isn't it?
It absolutely is. And if you want a truly vivid way to remember ephemeral, think of the mayfly. They only live for such a short time, sometimes just a few hours. It makes them a poignant symbol for something that doesn't stick around for long.
Oh, I'll definitely remember that one. Okay, ready to lighten the mood a bit. Let's talk about a word that just radiates good vibes.
Chuffed.
Chuffed. Oh, it's just one of those words that perfectly sums up a feeling, don't you think?
Right.
That deep sense of contentment, of satisfaction, maybe even a little pride, especially when you've achieved something. Picture someone, they've just aced a really tough exam, or they've received some recognition that they totally deserve. They're beaming, they're happy. That's chuffed in action.
You can practically hear the grin in their voice when someone says it. I love it. It always makes me think of British English for some reason.
You're right, it is distinctly British. Been part of their slang since the 19th century. Back then it meant pleased with oneself, But as time went on, it broadened to just a more general sense of happiness and pride.
And it's so interesting how words do that, how they evolve. It's like it's not just language changing, but culture shifting too, how people express themselves. It's all connected. Like each generation leaves its mark on the words they use. Absolutely. It's a never-ending process of reinvention and adaptation.
Yeah.
But what's truly incredible is that these expressions, no matter how old they are or where they came from, they still resonate with us today. They haven't lost their power. They connect us to something universal about the human experience, something that goes beyond time and where we come from.
You know, it just occurred to me, it's really interesting when you think about how many of these expressions give us a glimpse into how a culture deals with, well, sensitive topics like kick the bucket. It's a pretty lighthearted way to talk about something as serious as, death.
That's a very astute observation.
Mm.
It really speaks to that human tendency to use euphemisms, especially around subjects that make us uncomfortable or that are tough to talk about directly.
Exactly. It's like we're trying to find a way to acknowledge these big, weighty topics, but without getting too, I don't know, heavy about it, almost like by giving it a lighter spin, maybe even a humorous one. It helps us cope.
Precisely. And you know what's interesting about euphemisms? Just like idioms, they often reveal these subtle cultural differences, these unspoken rules about what's considered appropriate. They can be completely different from one language or culture to the next, and that tells us a lot about how different groups of people view those sensitive topics.
Makes you wonder about the stories behind other expressions, doesn't it? Like, what was going on in the world that led people to start using a phrase like brush up on in that figurative way?
It reminds us that language is never static, is it? Always changing, always evolving, shaped by everything around us, from
Yeah.
social trends to technology, you name it.
Oh, absolutely. Just look at how many new words and phrases we have now thanks to the internet and social media, going viral, sliding into DMs, throwing shade. It's like a whole new language just popped up out of nowhere. But it's interesting though, right? Slang terms, those can be fleeting, here today, gone tomorrow. But expressions like brush up on, those seem to have staying power. Maybe because they tap into these really universal human experiences, learning, growing, trying to better ourselves. That never goes out of style.
Exactly, and that's part of what makes them so powerful, so enduring. That inherent relatability, it connects us to this shared human experience that goes beyond any one time or place.
Okay, so this has been fascinating, but I have a question for you. We've been talking about how much fun it is to uncover these hidden meanings and origins, but how do we actually use these expressions in everyday conversations, without sounding like we're trying too hard or coming across as, I don't know, pretentious?
Ah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's all about striking that balance between expanding your vocabulary and keeping things natural. My advice? Don't force it. The key is to let these expressions work their way into your conversations organically.
So instead of saying, I was really happy about the news, you might say something like, I was absolutely chuffed.
Precisely. It just adds a little something extra, a touch of personality, makes your language more vibrant.
Like adding a dash of spice to your sentences.
Exactly. And honestly, the more you expose yourself to these expressions, the more natural it'll feel to use them in your own speaking and writing. It's just like anything else. The more you practice, the better you get.
And isn't that part of what makes language so fun? It's this ongoing journey of learning and exploring and finding new ways to express ourselves.
Couldn't agree more. And the more you embrace that journey, the more enjoyable and rewarding it becomes. Who knows what other linguistic gems we might stumble upon along the way?
Wow, time really flies when you're having fun with language, huh? This has been a fascinating deep dive, but I feel like we've only scratched the surface of these incredible expressions.
We have, haven't we? But that's part of what makes language so fascinating. There's always more to learn, more to uncover. It's an endless journey of discovery.
Exactly. And if there's one thing I hope our listeners take away from today, it's this. Don't be afraid to really embrace the quirks of the English language. Those little oddities, those unexpected turns of phrase, that's what makes it so rich and endlessly fascinating.
Couldn't agree more. It's those moments, right? When you stumble across a word like ephemeral, or you find yourself casually using chuffed in a sentence, they're like these little victories in your quest to become a master of language.
They really are. And who knows, maybe one of our listeners out there will be the one to coin the next kick the bucket or brush up on, the next big idiom or slang term. Language is alive. It's constantly growing and changing with every generation that uses it.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time for us to wrap up this deep dive.
I'm feeling quite chuffed with our linguistic adventures today. Thanks for joining us, everyone.
Until next time, Keep those dictionaries close, those ears open, and never lose that curiosity for the magic of language.